I was distracted and I forgot to turn my stuff on. Hi, hello, hi. This is FSP Live. I'm the Amelia one. My pronouns are she, they. And we go live Fridays at 4 Eastern, now through next week. Robyn is our mod in the chat. And today we're going to talk about Murderbot and some intro to Shadow stuff, while also giving you the conclusion of the last FSP podcast episode, which was about me and my struggle with pride and should I go to the parade or, processing my identity. And yeah, I talked to my therapist about it, and that was helpful. And as you can see, or as you may have seen from the YouTube version of the podcast episode, I said I would post a picture of either me at the parade or me at the opera, and instead I posted a picture of my sleep tracking device where I was asleep for the full duration of the parade. Because you know what's more demanding? The more demanding part of my identity is my disability. It's long COVID and the chronic fatigue and the fact that I could barely get out of bed that whole day because I drove to Boston from Cape Cod, which is like 2 hours, the night before, and attended a concert, which was totally amazing. It was a magnificent concert of like one of those trope characters that appears in like every opera for a century, and it was like from a bunch of different operas over time periods and showed like the progression of how that character was treated by composers over about a century's worth of changing characteristics of opera. It was magnificent. I really enjoyed it, and then I checked into my hotel at about midnight and was starving. And so I fell asleep really late, and so when I tried to get up to go to the seminar in the morning, nope, that was not gonna happen, and in fact, I fell back asleep for the whole duration of the parade. But the thumbnail for this live video, is me at the opera that night. I did go, and it was magnificent. The Boston Early Music Festival hires some magnificent performers, and it was a delight. However, it was not accessible. I was gonna say at all, but like it was technically conformed to all the federal requirements of the um, Americans with Disabilities Act. It had an entrance for people with disabilities, mobility limitations. It had a seat for them, but it was uncomfortable. It was awkward. It was like sitting in the aisle and being in the way of everybody else. It was very much an afterthought, a jury rigged um, afterthought. Taking an old building and just like figuring out, I guess we could do this in order to make it accessible to people with mobility limitations. Truly just minimal, bare minimum. Um, uh, Even at the like magnificent performance on Friday night, which was like the recital of this like one kind of nanny character, um, there was the accompanist, harpsichordist, um, spoke and gave like some historical context and did not use a microphone. Was just like, "Oh no, I'm plenty loud," and was not loud enough. Was I could barely understand him. And then Paul Odette, who was like the director of the entire festival, gave a cool talk before the opera that night. And he also was like, "I'm usually so loud, I don't need a microphone." And happily, 5 people in the room plus me were all like, "Use the microphone." "Do I need the microphone?" he asks. Like, I never need a mic. We were all like, "Yes, you need to use the microphone, dumbass." Paul Odette's not a dumbass. He's incredibly smart, incredibly good musician. But like, Boston Early Music Festival needs to hire a disability consultant to make it. Anyway, I got to go to the opera. I didn't go to the parade because being disabled is a part of my identity that subsumes everything else and takes precedence in my day-to-day living. So that's how that went. Um, so the thing we're going to talk about today uh, is Intro to Shadow. Coming up soon, Emily and I are going to be recording an episode about shadow work, which is like a Jungian psychological thing. Specifically, it has to do with his uh, concept of the collective unconscious. The collective unconscious is, you can think of it sort of as like a resource that all humans have access to, of ideas and concepts and archetypes, uh, because every human has certain experiences in common. We all have experiences with caretakers. I mean, otherwise, we don't live long enough to have a conscious. Um, if we're living long enough to have a conscious that is aware of its unconscious, then we definitely have had experience with caretakers or leaders and friends. We have experiences with uh, knowledge, learning, all that stuff. And so when we dream, for example, our unconscious tends to give us archetypes, these images that probably relate to the same kind of thing for everybody, although in like different ways of being interpreted. Um, so I have a list of like, so there are kind of four categories that in my mind, this is not what anybody else calls them, but I call them legacy, service, connection, and mental emotional. I call them this because that's what they are. This People use other words to describe them, but what they are is those things. And the first three, legacy, connection, and service, are the three things that are shown in positive psychology research to be what give people the experience of meaning in their life. That's my cabbage song. I'll sing the cabbage song. Close enough for jazz. Okay, here's the meaning song. CABBAGE. Meaning is a leafy green. Grow it yourself by listening. Play or connect or sing with me. Leaving a legacy behind. Or heeding the call to serve mankind. Or loving someone. Loving someone, that's enough. CABBAGE. Meaning is a leafy green. So leaving a legacy behind, or heeding the call to serve mankind, or loving someone, being part of a connected relationship. That's the cabbage song for learning how to create meaning. It doesn't come from achieving something or by being given something and you get meaning from a thing. Nope. Meaning comes from you making it, and you make it by working toward a legacy, living in a connected relationship, or uh, or performing service to others. And those happen to be perfectly aligned with three of the four categories of archetype in Jungian psychology. The other one they call spiritual, but it's also like mental, emotional. And each one of these four categories has three subcategories that, like this is very structured and everybody labels them. But of course, Jung spoke in German. So like the specific words that he used being translated to English, they're going to lose some of their nuance in terms of their meaning. So considering that this is very nuanced stuff, it needs to be taken kind of with a grain of salt, the way that the words are translated when you just look at like a chart of all this stuff. But the kinds of things include like a creator, a sage, or like a wise old crone, an innocent, or like a child, an explorer, a rebel, a hero, the wizard or magician, um, the jester, comedian, everyman, lover, and caregiver. So those are all archetypes that might appear in your dreams in some way, or might appear in your parts work. And that comes from a framework designed by Jung. Now, each one of these aspects also has a shadow version. And basically, the shadow version of each of these is the sort of negative potential outcomes result in the opposite of the thing. Um, a leader is the archetype, but then the shadow of that would be like the autocrat or the dictator, right? So there's a negative way of being that same thing. And more broadly speaking, your shadow or some shadow aspect of yourself is something that you're gonna recognize in someone else that you hate, that you despise, that you feel ashamed of. It's something in yourself that you may or may not consciously be aware of, but when you meet somebody who has that quality, they piss you off, sort of unreasonable amounts. They make you feel really uncomfortable. Uh, that probably makes sense to people, I'm hoping. Um, when it comes to, uh, sorry, Christine wrote "Ah, Robin," and there is a song um, that goes, "Ah, Robin, gentle Robin." It's like an old, like, English, not a madrigal, but, lute song, I think. Anyway, that's me being distracted by an early music reference that was probably not even intentional. I'm gonna talk about Shadow in Murderbot because it's time. Okay. Um, so when you think about Shadow and, like, kind of unreasonable hatred and Uh, so this manifests in obvious things like homophobia. Uh, there is a stereotype about, like, conservatives who've been raised in conservative communities, who have been taught that homosexuality is a sin or is a perversion. But deep down, some part of them is like, dude, you're gay. And they become like the most outspoken critics of gay rights, uh, and, equality and equity, and part of their vociferous hatred is fear, is that they see something in someone else that is that they have in themselves, but they feel ashamed of. So, that's why homophobia isn't about hatred, it's about fear. Um, It's just a kind of denial at the same time. So that's like that kind of shadow thing is how this stuff turns up in your, like, day-to-day life. If there's somebody that really pisses you off, like, look closer because that's probably a part of you that you may not have given, as much compassion as is described. Aubrey Robin says, Aubrey Gordon talks about how the hardest critics of fat people are former fat people. Yeah, or people who have felt fat, even if they are not actually. Um, yeah, people who fear the most the shame and the ridicule that would be experienced by a fat person. People who fear that the most are the ones who show the most intolerance, if not hate. So yeah, that's a great point, Robin. Thanks for that. Um, how this showed up, and it was so I had to talk about it. I have to talk about it this week, even though we haven't done the shadow episode yet. Um, uh, in Murderbot this week, uh, Gurathin, who is the augmented human uh, which means that he's a regular person, but he's got like technological augments. He's got like a port in his neck that means that he can interact with technology. He can hardwire himself to technology to interact with it instead of using a screen like we interact with technology using a device. He has the device basically implanted into him, so he is a little bit bionic. um, and Murderbot hates Gurathin. Murderbot doesn't like Gurathin. He says out loud, "I don't like you." And he doesn't understand. In the book, he's like, "All these other people seem to like you, but I don't know why. I don't like you." And Gurathin, in turn, is the one who is the one of the Prezox team who is the most anti Murderbot, who is the most suspicious of it, who is the most um, scared of it, who advocates for abandoning it, for shutting it down, plans on like turning it in at the end of their contract, suspects that Murderbot is in on whatever the bad thing that's happening to them is. Um, and it is a very clear setup of like these two kind of feel like shadows of each other. Um, for example, in episode 2, uh, Murderbot's out on doing stuff with Mensa, and Garathan goes into Mensa's room back at the habitat and like sniffs her pillow. And uh Murderbot's like, "Oh, that's just sad. That's just pathetic." Uh but one of the things that's the most important thing to happen in the story, both the book and the show, is Murderbot's admiration for Mensa, which is the same admiration that Garathan has. And in the show, which doesn't happen in the book, Murderbot goes into Garathan's mind. Murderbot is hardwired connected to Garathan and gets to like kind of have a glimpse inside Garathan's mind. And this is not in the book that this happens, and it's also not in the book that Garathan has this like intense kind of fixation, crush thing for Mensa. Um, so Mensa feels a thing that Murderbot also feels and might kind of be ashamed of feeling. Because it's really important to the story that Mensa is competent, Mensa is reliable. Um, Mensa might be an intrepid space explorer. Mensa's brave. Mensa is a good leader. Mensa is someone that um, Mensa is someone that Murderbot can trust. She comes and rescues it. Murderbot's about to be destroyed, to be implanted with a thing, and well, he is implanted with a thing, and Mensa comes and rescues him. She's rescuing me. It actually says, and uh, that's really significant. So in Garathan's mind, Garathan thinks the others I love as one loves their children. You I love as my equal, as my superior, and that is exactly the experience that Murderbot has. At the end of the books, Murderbot calls Mensa my favorite human, and that is why Murderbot's life changes, is because Mensa is someone he can respect and trust. Um, and when she doesn't quite give him everything he needed, um, uh, then he feels free to leave and be like, "You did a lot for me. Bye." Sorry, spoiler alert for Murderbot, but come on. um, okay, so there is a they get okay, just for a joke. I mean, count your drinks, drink some water, have a good time. Okay, so Garathan says, I want to quote it directly because Garathan says to Murderbot, maybe you're just defective, a defective unit that's one thought away from killing everyone around you. And David Dastmalchian plays Gurathin. And this performance from this actor is spectacular because in the moment that he's saying this, he's got this like exhausted, pained face and voice that shows that it's clear Gurathin's talking about himself. It's clear Gurathin is saying, maybe you are defective. He he's saying maybe I am defective. And I felt from episode 2 that they were setting up Gurathin as Murderbot's shadow. Because as I've talked about before, good fiction works so that the protagonist uh, is the main character of the story, but all the other people and things in the story are represent parts of the individual. So like Mensa represents um the kind of the part of Murderbot that is wise and accepting and compassionate and a good leader. And which are all parts of those archetypes I was talking about, the leadership and the connection and the mental slash emotional slash spiritual stuff. Yeah. So Garathan kind of represents as a whole Murderbot's shadow. Both Murderbot and Gurathin are part human, part technology, to much different degrees, but they have that in common. And I did not see it coming that they would set up Gurathin to feel like Murderbot was his Gurathin shadow. I didn't see that coming, and, well played. I thought that was really good. And it made me wanna, like, talk about it today even though we haven't done an FSP episode that is about, um about shadow work yet, but that's coming next, I think. So then there's the other aspect and the other layer of shadow stuff that comes up when I consume Murderbot content. Like in the very beginning when I first started talking about Murderbot, I was like, "Oh, I'm disappointed that they hired Alexander Skarsgård to play Murderbot because Alexander Skarsgård is so conforms to a masculine ideal that is like the narrow, arbitrary, socially constructed ideal of like white, kind of Dorito shaped, blonde, uh, dude. Um, the and I was like, oh, but like, why would that be of particular? Um, mm, why would that strike me with such displeasure? Because I am also someone who physically, visibly conforms to a gender ideal. I mean, not the ideal, but like for sure a cartoon stereotype of an AFAB person. Like there's just no doubt when someone looks at me that they just were AFAB like immediately, even though on the inside, just like Murderbot on the inside, has nothing to do with gender. Um, and so when I see a character who is a gender, um, represented, physically manifested in a body that is cartoonishly gendered, that brings up stuff for me. That brings up my, um, problems with processing my identity that give me sob face. Or would that don't give me sob face anymore because I worked through a lot of it in therapy since we recorded that episode. But, like, that's one of the things we learn from the fiction we consume. We learn through the stories that connect to us, the things that are important to us. Brandon Sanderson writes in the Stormlight Archive series that we learn about people from the lies they want to be told, from the stories they want to be told. And when I recognize a part of myself in the character of Murderbot, and then I see the character portrayed in a way that I feel I have the same limitation. I'm uncomfortable with that. So, they're using the shadow in the story, and I am experiencing shadow phobia rejection feelings in my experience of watching. It's confronting. Christine, very proud of you doing the processing you did not want to do. I mean, that's the thing. We talked last week about, finding a therapist who like, a therapist who will push you into doing uncomfortable things that are good for you versus a therapist who just, like, doesn't either doesn't push you at all or pushes you into things that you're genuinely not interested in or not ready for, and I've been in therapy a lot. So, like, I'm aware when I have, like, "Oh, there's this hard thing. There's this uncomfortable thing." I am very aware that I need to turn toward that thing with kindness and compassion, and I say that in this kind of, like, ugh way because it's practically just a rote phrase to memorize, but I also feel the truth of it, and it's so frustrating that that's the answer so often. It is so, so, so frequently the dumb answer. Well, if that's hard for you, you need to turn toward it with kindness and compassion. Yeah. It was amazing how you just almost give me a simple answer. I mean, and Emily's answer was not a simple answer. Emily's answer was, here is this a book you can read that helps tell this story. And, also like some true stories of things that have happened to her. And, like, this is the same, like, support that I got from Emily when I was first hospitalized with stress-induced illness. Here's a big, references to peer-reviewed literature that are gonna help solve this problem is Emily's very helpful, but, you know, one of the reasons I wanna talk to her is because I was like, "Oh, Emily's an expert in this. Maybe she'll just know." I mean, she did know because the answer was I need to turn toward it with kindness and compassion, but I didn't I didn't wanna because it's hard. But it turns out that it's not that hard. Like, I just had to do it, and it was fine. And honestly, it helps to talk it through because it gives you some perspective on, like, I'm having this, like, little discomfort processing this identity. This, it it there's like a little knife that's going just a little tiny one. Um, but the truth is I don't feel a need to change my body to conform to a socially constructed ideal of more masculine or even less feminine. Like, I really just don't give 2 bananas what I how I appear to people, except that I feel like I ought to conform to the socially constructed ideal. I ought to conform to the ideal. Here's another thing. All of our lives until we were about 30, Emily and I thought we were fraternal twins. And every time people would ask us, "Oh, are you identical or the other kind?" Because nobody knows what the other kind was called. Maybe that's changing now that information is distributed differently. But we were asked all the time, "Are you identical or the other kind?" And we were like, "Oh, we're fraternal." And often we would be explaining to people the difference between identical and fraternal twins. And you could always feel the disappointment in the other person because we weren't like the most twin kind of twins. We were those, the other kind of twin that's not like as much twin like. So you feel this desire to conform to the most thing. Uh, um, so, which I know is different because now, when Emily was publishing "Come as You Are," which was her first nonfiction book, um, she told stories about us, comparing us, and because we had learned that like 1 in 4 uh, pairs of twins who are 1 in 4 to 1 in 5 pairs of twins who are identified as fraternal because they have 2 separate placentas, 1 in 5 of those sets of twins actually turn out to be identical twin whose eggs split so early that they develop their own independent placentas. Um, uh, uh, Now, so because of that, she wanted to, like, do her due diligence for Publish Come As You Are and make sure that we were in fact fraternal, and we took the test, and the results came back, and we were actually monozygotic twins. 99.9999999% certainty that we were identical twins. So then when people started asking us, "Oh, are you identical or the other kind?" We were like, "Oh, we're identical." And we had this funny story about how we used to think we were fraternal, and, like, the delight from people that, "Oh, you're the twiniest kind of twin." Uh, so that we conform to the most twinnest expectation of twins that you could want to twin, because we look a lot alike, and for all of our lives, it was like, "You seem identical," and, like, I mean, it turns out that's because we are, but because now I've seen the difference in people's reaction to us telling them, "Yes, we're identical," and then being like, "Oh, la la," and us in the past being like, "No, we're fraternal," and then being like, "Oh, I know for a fact that when you conform to someone's ideal expectation, they feel differently about you." It gives them more pleasure when you conform. Robin, as someone who was disinvited from queer spaces when I started dating a cis man, I get the struggle. Yeah, identity versus your lived appearance is, uh, and so I have the feeling of, like, do I even belong in a queer space if the life I'm living is not openly, obviously queer, the consequence of which is that I don't experience the discrimination of, you know, anti-pride, anti-LGBTQI plus, um, people experience. And so if I'm not experiencing the negative consequences, then do I even fit? Do I even matter to that space? And the answer for now is it doesn't matter because I'm too disabled to be in community or in spaces with people anyway. My the being disabled is too much of an impact. It interferes too much. It interferes so much that I can't access the places where I might be impacted by that. So, yeah. Christine, I very strongly dislike I mean, same. But I can also kind of relate to how someone who has faced a lot of bullying, for example, for being queer in a way that really violates people's expectations would think that um would think that it wasn't fair for someone who's never experienced that to consider them part of that community. I can kind of see that. I mean, but this is the exact rationale of TERFs, that, like, well, a trans woman was born and raised and treated as not a woman for their childhoods, and so they were raised and treated and never learned about the discrimination that girls experience. So therefore, they don't belong in community with cis women, which is a wrong and bad thing to think. It is Yeah, it is a gatekeeping that is bigotry. So obviously then the answer is that we shouldn't be gatekeeping the other direction, except I'm on the other side of, like, not being um part of the marginalized community enough. So when it's a marginalized community doing it to a less marginalized person, it feels different than, like, a rich white woman who has experienced some of the aspects of being part of the marginalized community that is not man, but is otherwise immensely powerful. When that person says that a very marginalized community doesn't belong to her community, that is so obviously wrong to everybody except her. I'm talking about JKKK Rowling. Yeah, just in case you didn't know. Christine, I usually don't get read as queer, neither am my gender nor my sexuality, but it's a very double-edged sword. You get some benefits, safety, but also loss of erasure. That Thank you for putting it so succinctly. I really struggle with words for describing the experience, but yeah, the double-edged sword of the safety and erasure. It's the same thing that happens about having an invisible disability. Sometimes I don't need to use a mobility aid, but that doesn't mean that I'm fully able or that my mobility is acceptable for daily life. It just means that I don't get seen in it. Having visible identities does not invalidate those identities. Oh, Robin, that's exactly the right thing to say. Thanks for that. The cost of invisibility is high. This is not in contact to other trans people's marginalizations. Yeah, the cost of invisibility is high. Yeah, yeah. So, one of the things that TERFs claim about trans women is that using language that is inclusive of trans women, like saying pregnant people and people who menstruate, which might include a trans man who's still got a uterus, right? Um, that inclusive language erases womanhood. That is such a bullshit, stupid train of thought or disconnect of logic. That's like saying having spaces that are accessible to people with mobility limitations erases walking people, right? Like there's no erasure of a mainstream, you know, community just because it also makes space for people who are marginalized. Very interestingly is exactly Christine says, which very interesting is exactly how being ADHD doesn't get seen by others, so they don't seem to. Yep, being a kind of neurodivergent that is able to live in the world pretty successfully, relatively successfully, is. I mean, that's why people don't like to use the term high functioning autistic. I mean, a level one autistic person tends to function very well, but I think I feel certain I've told the story about going to the planning meeting for the conference. Yes, I definitely told this story last week. Going to the planning meeting for the conference and feeling a lot of paranoia about having to share a room with someone and booking my own room and paying for my own room so I didn't have to share a room with someone else on the committee, which is how it was budgeted that the committee would be paying for the planning committee to be 2 to a room. They couldn't get rooms for everybody individually, and I felt so strongly that I would not be able to tolerate that I got my own room, and even that was not enough to help me stay feeling calm and safe throughout the whole weekend of planning. I had multiple meltdowns alone in my hotel room, and me on the floor in my hotel room dreading having to go back to the next meeting. That is not high functioning. None of that is high functioning. It was I was low functioning. Like my verbal capacity was extremely limited in those moments. Like you can't describe me as being high functioning eh, all the time. Oh, I see contrast, not good. Thank you for correcting me. This is not in contrast to other trans people's march. I got you. I got you. Yeah. 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 So, I mean, and one of the things that's inherent to having a disability like autism or being ADHD is that we hide we hide the parts that are unsightly. We I I get my own hotel room so I have a place to break down where no one will see, right? Because if somebody sees that, they'll think there's something wrong with me. Like maybe what I actually need is for people to see what's wrong with me so that they can understand why I need some of the um adaptive things that I do. Why I need to be in my own hotel room, right? Like I You can't just be like, "Okay, everybody shares a hotel room," as if that's just okay with everybody. No, some people really just can't, and, that might be a disability accommodation. Um, I hadn't been diagnosed then. It was right after this incident that my psychiatrist diagnosed me with social anxiety and prescribed me Valium, which was a very comfortable time in my life. When that was some very intense medication for treating a thing I didn't really have, but symptoms that I did have. So, it worked out. Yeah. So, um, I think maybe shadow work is even more intense for people who have, invisible disabilities, invisible differences, which is like those, poor closeted conservative men who are raised being teased for being sissies, and they manned up and they masked so hard that no one would ever think that they were effeminate, and no one would ever suspect that they had those feelings inside them. And so they end up having tremendous fear and act as though they hate the the actual out gay men in the world, or anybody who is gay. Also not Robyn says, also not for nothing, some groups of lesbians have been TERFs for decades, and there's a ton of misogyny from gay men. Oh, yeah, like gatekeeping in queer spaces is wild. So in conducting, in classical music in general, there are a lot of gay men. There are a lot of gay men. I am personally acquainted with more gay men than straight men, even though that's at a population level statistically very improbable. But because I know so many musicians and so many musicians, like music, the arts in general are a space that are welcoming to different kinds of personalities and identities, and we're more open to, um, non-straight LGBTQIA2 plus identities way before the mainstream society was. So there's a lot of gay men and who are conductors, and I definitely know more gay men who are conductors than straight men who are conductors or church organists. Um, Not all of them, but definitely more. And so I have been in spaces with me and a lot of gay men, and the way I get treated by gay men is has not been great. Largely ignored is what happens. Uh, like I don't exist. Like they can't even see me. Like their eyes for feminine looking people just are not attuned. I guess I don't know, but I have experienced a lot of misogyny that's a very different kind of misogyny than I experience from straight men, um, but it's a different flavor, but it's just as intense. It's sour instead of salty, you know? Yeah, gatekeeping in queer spaces, like, and I um, yeah. Christine, it's Pride here tomorrow. I'm only going because I'm in the parade with a group. That's fun. I will show up at the last possible moment, wear double hearing protection, and probably leave within an hour. Good call. Yeah. Um, I have recently adopted the habit of wearing like not just earbuds, but like actual headphones in public, whether I'm listening to something or not, because the cue of like "Don't talk to me" is so useful, so terrific, uh, so effective. Uh, like it protects your hearing because like I, like a lot of autistic people, have sensory sensitivities, and before I knew that it was autism and sensory sensitivities, I would just get grumpy and not understand why when spaces were really loud. Um, when I was at a dance in high school, I had a meltdown once because it was so loud at the dance and I did not understand. I thought it was I didn't know what I thought it was, but I had to go like I had to leave. And now that I know, oh, it's because I have really sensitive like auditory processing stuff that Now I'm like, oh, it's that's the autism. That's not just because I'm a musician. It's part of one of the reasons I like music and like conducting so much because it requires that kind of sensitive listening. Yeah, but, like, covering my ears in public, man, it's great. Highly recommend. Absolutely brilliant idea. And the idea that you could just leave when you're done, things I wish I had known. You can just leave when you're done, and you don't have to, like, stay and until, like, the end of a thing because these are the hours, and so you have to be there for the whole thing. Man, yeah, I wish all autistic people knew that right now. Robyn, one of the circus performers I work with in the past, did a very beautiful piece about her auditory processing disorder. Very beautiful and very intense. Oh, is there a video or you were just at a live performance? Hold on. Electrolytes. Okay. So next week, nope. There is video. If you find a link, can you put it in the description? It doesn't have to be now because I gotta go. But if you find a link, and I think you have editor status on the channel, so you could post a link in the description. That'd be great. But, there are 2 more episodes, of Murderbot, and I'm excited to see what they do, especially in the context of, hopefully, maybe next week, we will put out the shadow episode of FSP. Maybe not, but probably. We'll see. In the meantime, it's been lovely being a person in the world with y'all. Thanks for being here, and I'll see you next time. Bye. Bye. Bye-bye. Bye. 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 Bye.